Thank you for listening to the Yoga for Balance podcast. I'm your host, Heather Gjerde. Thank you so much for being here. I'd love to start another week with a big fresh breath. I think that's such a nice way to sink in, to relax, and to just get into an enjoying listening mode. So if you can go ahead and feel yourself relax a little bit. Maybe do a little scan of the body, check in first from the top of your head, scan all the way down through the feet. Feel everything get a little heavier, a little more relaxed. And now go ahead and deepen your breath. Fill your belly all the way and your chest. Open mouth, sigh, and let it out. Take 2 more grounding breaths like this. Fill the lungs to capacity. Sigh and release. 1 more breath. Feel even more relaxed, present, here now. Thank you for being here. In this week's episode, I'm going to touch on some various styles of yoga. I thought as we're setting the foundation for some of these conversations to come over the next few weeks and months, I'd give you a nice little overview of the different styles of yoga that I'm familiar with and that I find a lot of people that I come across in the yoga studios as students in my travels have been introduced to or maybe have back home at their yoga studio or in their communities. So I wanted to cover those just to give you a kind of blanket idea of these are some different styles of yoga you might come across. And I think as a new student, at least speaking from my own personal experience, it seems to go that you kind of get this acknowledgement of yoga, you are introduced to it somehow. Maybe there's a class at the gym or at college or somewhere convenient that you can just take yoga. And you're not sure what style it is. I often, when I'm meeting someone who's done yoga a few times, they're like, oh, I did yoga. I'm not sure. It was at my gym. And I think that's just being introduced to the practice. Everything is so new. So maybe even there was a style under the description given. But if you're not really familiar, it's yoga to you. It's all new. So it can feel like a lot. It's like a big blanket term. And so my goal is just to break it down a little bit for you. And then I will be talking with individuals, hopefully getting to most of these styles and people within the community that embrace this style. They teach it at their studio or in whatever setting that they're teaching it. And that's one thing I want to talk about. So these different settings, you may find, let's say it is just a yoga class at your gym or your work offers a yoga class. Oftentimes in that case, the teacher may have a specific style or they're specifically putting in something general there so it could be customized to maybe who shows up that day. For instance, I teach at a resort and spa and I could have a guest come that's a regular daily or weekly vinyasa yoga student or a student come that's never practiced yoga before or that maybe has an injury they're working around or a health condition. So in that case, because I have a variety of background, I am studied in Vinyasa yoga. I can teach Tantra yoga, guided meditation, a more restorative flow. But that's my background as a teacher. And so in many of these spaces, people may arrive not knowing quite where they can take their practice, what might be offered in the space. So with yoga classes that are just labeled as basic yoga, check in, see who the teacher is, what their background is, ask the space what kind of yoga that might be and come with an open mind. It's likely that they are keeping that open so that they can somewhat cater it to the needs of the community that it is serving. I think one great example of that is often in a gym or a space that's offering another kind of exercise or workout. If they first add a yoga, they tend to add a class that's geared toward that community, of course. So if it's, for instance, a climbing gym where I work, if they had offered one yoga class, they'd likely want a yoga class geared toward climbers, stretching the different areas of the body and opening up and strengthening the areas of the body that climbers need to climb, of course. So that can explain if it's a kind of general yoga term on a schedule in a space like that. And then you can go into a category where it's a studio that specializes in a specific style. And in that case, maybe the studio offers just that style, or they may offer a variety of styles, in which case you'd want to look at the schedule, start reading through the descriptions, especially if it's something you haven't taken before. And maybe there's something new you can try that's going to spark your interest and be your new favorite yoga style. I think oftentimes you also find a similar style of yoga depending on where you are in the world and how yoga has grown and evolved over time in that place. So for instance, when I was in Ecuador, I met many people who were students of Jivamukti yoga. And in the United States and where I've traveled in the past, I really didn't encounter that. So I found that really interesting. And these were friends of mine coming from Europe and I believe Australia. I've heard it's common there. So I find it interesting if you're ever traveling on vacation or speaking with someone from another place, online friends with someone, just to learn and find out what yoga is popular by you. What kind of yoga do you practice? I think my biggest piece of advice, if this is new to you and you are exploring different styles of yoga or wanting to understand the practices that you're doing in these different spaces and with different teachers in your town or in workshops that you do or experiences you encounter. So just explore, see if your interest gets piqued by one of these descriptions or one of the more in-depth interviews that I do. And I think the most important thing is to experience it. If there is something that is piquing your interest about that style, go and experience it. There are so many resources to do that, either going on Yelp and searching that style in your town or looking for a video on YouTube so that you can just try it out, maybe get a little introductory yoga class on there. And then from there, if you can go in person, of course, especially if this is a new style for you, one great benefit to going in person is that you find a teacher who has more experience in that style that can look at you, potentially provide adjustments depending on the style. Again, Tantra yoga doesn't suggest many adjustments from the teacher versus Vinyasa, where it's a little more alignment based. They do want, potentially, the space may ask the teachers to provide adjustments. So that's another thing that might be different from space to space and just to look into when you are visiting a new yoga space. So without further ado, we're just going to go through a few of the styles that I'm most familiar with. I will share my experience with that style and how I would describe it, and maybe it's something that sounds interesting to you to explore and try. Let's start with Hatha Yoga. Hatha, Ha means sun and Tha means moon. Yoga means to join or yoke. Thus, Hatha Yoga means to join together the sun, masculine active energy, with the moon, feminine receptive energy, to bring balance and power to an individual. And original yoga really consisted of a lot of seated postures, breath work, and then some of the more modern known poses of today and more challenging poses have progressed over the years. So if you were to take a Hatha yoga class, for instance, it's going to be a more slower paced flow. You'll go in and out of more classic yoga positions or known as asanas. Asana means to take one seat. So that might not mean necessarily moving physically, but preparing the body to be in a position to be still, to be seated, to be oneself in that seat. And something interesting I learned is that Hatha yoga actually arose from the formative influence of Tantra, which, if you have been listening for a while, you may have heard Iris on the podcast talking about Tantra yoga in detail. But I'll briefly describe it as well for the purpose of this episode. So Tantra, from the root word, means expansive or whole. It recognizes that the entire fabric of existence is an expression of the divine feminine or Shakti energy. And we want to open up to that sense of divine within any experience that we're having. It defines the path of freedom not through the renunciation of our experience and desire, but largely through it. So you're really tapping into your own senses to find that universal connection and spirit within. It's such a beautiful practice. If you're actually taking the Tantra yoga class for physical asana movement, then you are flowing with the body and the breath only. Typically, there isn't music involved. It's a 3-part sequence that's usually set and taught over a 2 to 3 hour period. And it starts with either a standing or a short warming sequence. If you're doing the standing, it's much like a vinyasa class where you're moving, you're standing, you're balancing. And then you go in and out of a shavasana portion in the middle where you're waking in and out of shavasana, doing some movements, going back to shavasana. Becomes this really beautiful, almost moving meditation. I really find it beautiful. And then the very end is called makrasana, where you're laying on your belly, stretching the arms forward, and then going in and out of grounded poses like your cobra pose or locust pose. Next, let's talk about Vinyasa yoga. This is probably one of the more common yoga styles taught, at least I know in San Diego, through California, many parts of the United States. Vinyasa translates to place in a special way, and many people also translate it to breath synchronized movement and use Ujjayi breathing throughout the practice. And to find Ujjayi breath, it's a more powerful yogic breath. You would seal off the lips, breathe in and out through the nose, and pull and hug the belly button up and in toward the spine, and hug the muscles in the back of your throat as you exhale, heating the air on the way out. And then there's often a set form to those classes. So you would start in a pose that is grounding or maybe standing on the earth in your child's pose. Find your breath, so come into that Ujjayi breathing, and then you would be guided through an integration of the practice, starting to move and wake up the body. You would then move through some sun salutations where you would warm up the body through a series of rising to the sky, moving through chaturangas. And depending on how powerful that class is, if you're taking a power yoga class, you'll be moving pretty quickly through things, oftentimes moving breath to movement. Or if you're in more of a mellow vinyasa or hatha vinyasa, you may be holding poses for a little bit longer. Next, you'll be guided through a series of Surya Namaskar A's and B's, where you'll be guided through different standing poses linked together with breath, with movements that may be repeated 1 set of times, 2, 3 sets of times, depending on what you're working on in that class. At a point, you may get introduced to some inversions, some standing balancing poses, heart-opening poses, twists if you're working on digestion, spine health, and then grounding poses, coming down to earth, finding twists definitely toward the end, some nice hip opening poses. I love good heart openers. So a variety of things that could be placed together in that special way, depending on the teacher, the time of day. That's a big thing that will influence. Are we doing a very energizing vinyasa flow, or is it going to be something a little more mellow, winding us down from the day? So keep an eye on the schedule, see what level that vinyasa class is, since there is a lot of opportunity for flexibility around vinyasa. It's really important to try different teachers, to try different levels and work your way through the levels appropriately. Go to a level 2 if you're ready for those more challenging poses, or find a time that works for you that is that energy level you're looking for that day, that week, or at that point of your life. Next, you might see a hot yoga class, and this may be a really hot yoga class over 105 degrees, like a Bikram class, and that would move you through a set series of sequencing, and you would do each of the poses twice, moving through specific breath techniques and being guided by the instructor. That's going to be a very, very warm class, so definitely give that a try if you're interested. I wasn't personally a big fan of the Bikram class experience. To me, it was a little too hot, but I did see the benefit, kind of like when I did the Sweat Lodge Temescal in South America, and I just had a really nice, complete detox. I felt like everything got dripped out of me, and that is similarly how I felt with the Bikram class. Now, you might find something a little less heated in a yoga studio. For instance, in one of the studios we teach an 83 degree class. And in this case, it gets warm, certainly in a power flow. You're sweating, you're moving the breath through. The breath is heating you as well as the classroom. So again, just keep an eye out for the different studio spaces, what their heating is. And if heat isn't for you, you can certainly find plenty of yoga classes that are not heated whatsoever. Next, you might have heard of Ashtanga Yoga, and this is a more traditional set series that you would work through in a classroom setting, but you cannot move on to the next pose until you've mastered the pose before it. So you really work deeply through the poses to fully understand the alignment, to arrive to the pose and be there, and you get that teacher's blessing to move on to the next pose. And this isn't something I've practiced a lot. I've been introduced to it, but I will hope to bring an expert on to go deeper into Ashtanga for you. Anusara is another style you may have heard of. This style is really a heart-centered approach, moving energy through. And again, I've only practiced this briefly, but I hope to have my friend Luke here on the show where he'll talk a little more about Anusara practice. Kundalini. This is a practice that is very unique, and I've found to be very cleansing, clearing, moving me into an extremely high meditative state where I just feel super in tune with myself, with the present moment, and it's something I really recommend you trying. This uses breath, chanting, and meditation as primary tools in your practice. For instance, I had Kundalini as part of my 300-hour training. It was one of the side aspects of yoga that we practice and would learn about. And we did a core class around the solar plexus while I was in Ecuador. And we did, as part of that practice, a lot of chanting, mantras that were based around core healing and working on that core chakra, that solar plexus area. We did a lot of arm movements and leg movements that coincided with that. And in this case, and in many cases with Kundalini, you're repeating the motion. So for maybe 5-10 minutes at a time, you're doing the same mantra and arm motion, crossing the arms and crisscrossing, crossing the legs, maybe going up and down and sideways, and repeating that until the teacher guides you on to the next one. So it's a really interesting experience. It keeps you super present. and maybe beyond that. So I really do recommend you try that. And again, we'll hope to have someone on to go into greater detail talking about Kundalini for you. Next, you might have seen restorative on your schedule, or yin yoga. Restorative yoga, and sometimes these styles may get confused. They're both a more slow moving practice that you might see late nights at a yoga studio, maybe in the afternoons, or really any time a yoga studio could schedule this in. I've taught it at all times of the day, but restorative is a relaxing practice. You use a lot of props, so you may have a bolster, blocks, a strap, blankets, anything that can help you arrive to these various grounding, relaxing poses, and then getting to a place where you really can just release and relax. I was first introduced to restorative yoga in college. I took a rest and relaxation class. This was about the same time I started practicing yoga at home with Rodney. Great DVD, great introduction to yoga. But again, I thought of it as yoga. I'm practicing yoga at home. And so I also decided to try this restorative yoga in my rest and relaxation class. And I loved it. We would set up pillows and see, okay, if I'm laying down flat on the ground, how can I use props under my knees, under my arms, behind my head, under my neck, so that I can get to a place where there's nothing bothering me. I don't have to move at all or fidget because I'm just completely relaxed. And then we would do some guided meditations and visualization around relaxing the body so that we could really just release into those poses. So it's a beautiful practice if you're looking for some stress relief, really relaxing, allowing yourself to rest and relax into that for longer periods of time. So you may do a restorative class and get to maybe 10 poses in an hour, but you're slipping in and out of those poses so slowly and holding them for so long. It's just such a beautiful experience. And then yin is similar to restorative, but yin actually is more about stretching. So in this case, you may be using props, but the idea is you're stretching a little bit more actively so that you're really creating more space and opening. So oftentimes after a yin class, you may, for a few days or a day after, be a little sore. And this is part of the process of kind of opening up those spaces and creating new pathways to deepen into your yoga practice. But again, yin typically has its own training and learning. So I hope to have someone that is specifically trained in yin on the show to explain that in greater detail. Yoga Nidra is another thing you may see as a way to get into deeper rest and relaxation and sleep. And the Yoga Nidra I've been familiar with walks you through different parts of the body through visualization that you go in and you relax and you get guided to this space where you just feel completely relaxed, weightless, and like you're in a meditative state of mind. Prenatal yoga. This is yoga that is specific to women who are pregnant. So in this case, hormones are changing, flexibility is changing, women are becoming more flexible and open in different areas and have to be sensitive about, of course, that growing baby inside of them. So there's not as much twisting in these classes. You might be doing some open twisting in the opposite direction. It's similar things that your doctor is going to be telling you. That's all going to be incorporated into the yoga practice so that you can practice and enjoy the benefits of yoga safely while you're pregnant. One other style I'd like to just briefly touch on is Iyengar yoga. This is, again, a more alignment-based approach, but also using the use of props. And it's interesting, I read a little more about this. Light on Yoga is a beautiful book if you have a chance to read it. It was one of the first yoga books that I read. A lot about just the being a yoga student, being a yoga teacher, more about this foundational style. And I learned he had some really bad injuries. And because of this, and sicknesses and illnesses that he dealt with in life, and because of this, used props to get more comfortably into some of those foundational yoga poses. So today's yoga, much of it using the props, may have been influenced by that, by this really basic practice that helps students get into the poses more comfortably with the help of props. And in some cases may allow intermediate to advanced students to get deeper into poses or to find more growth or to get to that next level of a pose through the help of props. Other yoga styles, of course, are popping up all of the time, so do your research. They progress over time through different lineages, through different regions, through different trends. For instance, goat yoga. If you follow Yoga Girl Rachel Brathen on Instagram, she had gotten a goat when the goat was a baby, did yoga with it. It went viral on Instagram, and now there's goat yoga around the United States where you could practice yoga with baby goats. I'm definitely a proponent of service animals, so if practicing yoga with animals makes you happy, you can find yoga most likely with that animal. Or why not do yoga at home with your own animal? Izzy, my puppy, you'll often see her, and I can't call her a puppy anymore. She actually turns 10 on Sunday. Happy birthday, Izzy. She's here next to me right now as I record this podcast. She's always near me when I'm meditating or doing yoga, often trying to sit right on my meditation cards or on my yoga mat. I do feel animals are drawn to the peaceful practice of yoga as well. That is just a brief overview of many styles of yoga. Again, not all of which I am personally practiced in or deeply immersed in as a teacher. I have studied more immensely through Tantra yoga in my 300-hour training and Vinyasa yoga in my 200-hour training. But some of these styles I've been introduced to in one experience, in a workshop, in a classroom, at a special event. So there's so many different ways that you can go about getting introduced to these different styles. I'd love to hear from you if there's any that I missed that you'd like covered on the show that you think other people should learn about. Otherwise, I look forward to learning more and getting deeper, more deeply steeped into the styles through talking to teachers of those lineages. Thank you again for listening to another episode of the Yoga for Balance podcast. I'm your host, Heather Gjerde, and I'll look forward to speaking with you next week. Namaste.